Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a story today that I think you're going to find fascinating.
Yeah, should be a good one.
We're going to be talking about a woman, um, I'd say she's kind of a hidden figure in early Islamic history, even though she was connected to almost every major figure of that time.
Definitely under the radar, but such a fascinating story.
Her name is Lubaba bint al-Harith.
And sometimes she's called the most noble mother-in-law in Islam.
Okay, that's a title, right? The most noble mother-in-law.
Yeah.
So clearly she's connected to some important people.
Yeah, big time. Our main source for this deep dive is an Islamic lecture about Lubaba's life, and I'll tell you, her family tree is, well, let's just say you might want to grab a pen and paper to keep up.
Oh, really? That complex, huh?
It's pretty amazing. I mean, just to give you a glimpse, she was married to Abbas.
Abbas, like the Prophet Muhammad's uncle.
That's the one.
Wow. Okay. So right from the start, we're talking about someone deeply connected to the Prophet himself.
Absolutely. And through her marriage to Abbas, she became the mother of, well, you've probably heard of him, Abdullah ibn Abbas.
Oh, yeah. Abdullah ibn Abbas, one of the most famous scholars in Islamic history.
Exactly. So she wasn't just connected by marriage, she was the mother of someone who went on to shape Islamic thought in a major way.
Wow. This is already shaping up to be an incredible story. She's like at the center of everything.
Oh, and we're just getting started. There's more.
More. What is she like related to? I don't know, the caliphs or something?
Well, not directly to the Kellys, but remember I mentioned she was the prophet's sister-in-law.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, she was his sister-in-law twice.
Hey, hold on. Twice. How is that even possible?
Okay, so Lubaba had a full sister named Maimuna,
Okay.
and Maimuna became one of the prophet's wives.
Uh,
But then Lubaba also had a half-sister, Zainab, who, you guessed it, also married the prophet.
wow, that's some serious family connections.
It is. It's actually a really unique situation in early Islamic history. I mean, can you imagine those family dinners?
Right. Talk about being at the center of, well, everything. I guess it makes sense why she's called the most noble mother-in-law in Islam.
Right. But it's important to remember, these relationships weren't just about, like, social standing or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, the prophet had a deep respect for Lubaba and her half-sisters, Mamuna, Ozma, and Salma. He actually referred to them as, I think it's pronounced al-Akawat al-Muminat, which means, like, the faithful sisters.
So they weren't just related to him, they were some of his earliest and most devoted followers.
Exactly. That's a really important point. And to understand Lubaba's character even better, I think it helps to know a bit about her background, where she came from.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
What was her family like?
So she was from the Banu Hilal tribe.
Banu Hilal. Okay.
They were known for being, really strong and resilient, especially in the face of those harsh desert conditions.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Life in the desert, you got to be tough.
Yeah. Right, and Lubaba definitely embodied those qualities. The lecture describes her as, let's see, tough, strong, fearless. She wasn't afraid to stand up for what she believed in.
I'm starting to get a sense of her personality. Definitely not someone to mess with.
Oh, definitely not. And there's this one story, it really shows her courage. It's about how she defended Abu Rafi.
Abu Rafi.
He was a freed slave of her husband, Abbas.
Okay, I see.
And she defended him when he was being attacked by, well, none other than Abu Lahab.
Lubaba. Wait, now, for listeners who might not be as familiar,
Yeah.
can you remind us who he was and why this encounter is such a big deal?
Sure. So Abu Lahab was the prophet's uncle, actually, but he was also a fierce opponent of Islam. He's actually mentioned by name in the Quran, where he's condemned for his, hostility towards the Muslims.
So for Lubaba to stand up to him, that must have taken some serious guts.
It did. She was definitely not intimidated. The story goes that she saw Abu Lahab attacking Abu Rafi, and she just grabbed a tent pole and, well, she whacked him on the head.
She hit him with a tent pole. Wow, that's pretty intense.
It was. And she hit him hard, too. He ended up with a serious head injury.
Oh, wow. She didn't hold back.
Nope, not at all. And what's even more striking? Abu Lahab died just a few days later from that injury.
Really? So her actions might have actually had a major impact on, the course of events. It's just amazing to me how sometimes it's these, like, seemingly small acts of courage that can have these huge ripple effects.
I know, right? And this is just one example of Lubaba's incredible strength and determination.
It makes you wonder how many other stories like this are out there, about people who might not be as famous, but who are doing these amazing things.
Exactly. It's a reminder to, like, look beyond the big names and see the whole picture.
Right. And we're going to keep uncovering more of Lubaba's story. It gets even more fascinating.
Oh, yeah, just wait till you hear about when she converted to Islam.
Converted to Islam. Was she not Muslim from the beginning?
Well, that's the interesting part. She might have converted on the same day as, well, a pretty significant figure.
Oh, really? Who was that?
Khadijah.
No way. The
Hmm.
prophet's first wife.
Yeah.
So she was there from the very, very beginning.
It seems that way. Pretty incredible, right? Imagine being there, witnessing the revelation unfold firsthand.
Wow. Okay, so we've got Lubaba. She's from this tough, resilient tribe. She's fearless, stands up to Abu Lahab. She might have converted on the same day as Khadijah. This is already shaping up to be an amazing story.
Oh, we've barely scratched the surface. Just wait till you hear what happens next. It's a wild ride.
All right, I'm hooked. I can't wait to dive into the rest of Lubaba's story.
Me too. Let's get to it. So we left off with Lubaba possibly converting to Islam on the same day as Khadijah, the prophet's first wife.
Yeah, a pretty powerful statement about her commitment to the faith right from the start. But I'm curious about her husband, Abbas. We talked about how close Lubaba was to the prophet, but what about Abbas? Was he on board with Islam early on too?
Actually, no. His journey was, well, a bit different. You see, he wanted to kind of follow in the footsteps of his brother, Abu Talib.
Abu Talib, the one who protected the prophet even though he never actually became Muslim.
That's the one. And Abbas, he felt like he was kind of carrying on that legacy of protection, but from outside the faith, at least that's how it seems at first.
So he was supporting the prophet, but not necessarily the message of Islam. It must have been an interesting dynamic in their household, especially with Lubaba being such a devout believer.
It was definitely a complex situation, and
Well,
all of this was happening during a really, really difficult time for the early Muslims. We're talking about the boycott in Mecca, where the prophet and his followers were basically ostracized, faced all kinds of hardship.
yeah, the boycott, that was a brutal period. I can't imagine what it must have been like to live through that.
It was a time of intense pressure and persecution, and it was actually during this really difficult time that Lubaba gave birth to her son, Abdullah.
Oh, wow. Bringing a new life into the world amidst all that chaos. That must
Yeah.
have been incredibly challenging.
It was, but it also speaks volumes about Lubaba's resilience and her faith. She didn't let those hardships break her. And there's this really touching story about Abdullah's birth mentioned in the lecture.
Okay, I'm listening.
So, because of the boycott, there was a shortage of, well, pretty much everything. Basic necessities were hard to come by.
Yeah, I remember learning about how people were struggling to get even food and water during that time.
Right, exactly. So, when it came time for Abdullah's tanik,
Tamik.
oh yeah, sorry, it's a tradition where you take a softened date and rub it on the newborn's palate.
Oh, right, right.
But here's the thing, they didn't have any dates because of the boycott.
Oh, that's kind of heartbreaking.
It is. But in this moment, the prophet, he showed his deep love for Abdullah, and he actually used his own saliva to perform the ritual.
Oh, wow. That's a really powerful image. It speaks to the close bond between them, even from the moment Abdullah was born.
Yeah. Exactly. And this act, it's often cited to highlight the special place Abdullah held within the early Muslim community.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
To be blessed by the prophet in that way. I mean, it's no wonder he went on to become such a renowned scholar.
It's really remarkable. And, through all of this, Lubaba, she just kept creating this loving, faith-filled home for her children, even amidst the hardship.
She sounds like an incredible mother.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, their time in Mecca wasn't over yet, right? Even after the prophet and his followers migrated to Medina, Lubaba and her family stayed behind.
You're right. And their story takes another interesting turn during this time. The Battle of Badr, one of the most important battles in early Islamic history, it took place while they were still in Mecca.
The Battle of Badr. And wasn't Abbas, on the Meccan side during that battle?
He was. It might seem strange considering his connection to the Prophet, but remember, his approach to Islam was different. It was more about protecting the Prophet from a position outside the faith.
Yeah, that's right. So even though they were on opposing sides of a battlefield, there was still this underlying connection between them.
Exactly. And the story of Abbas's capture at Badr is pretty telling. He was captured, and just like any other prisoner, he was asked to pay a ransom.
Makes sense. But didn't he claim he didn't have the money?
He did. But then the Prophet did something truly astonishing. He revealed that he knew about a secret stash of money that Abbas and Lubaba had hidden.
Wait, hold on. How could the prophet have known about that unless... unless he was receiving divine revelation. That's a pretty big deal.
It was. And this incident, it's seen as a turning point for Abbas. It really solidified his belief in the prophet's message, in his prophethood.
So even in the midst of battle, there's this personal moment of revelation for Abbas. And it's tied directly to Lubaba. It's like a hidden piece of their story that really sheds light on his eventual conversion to Islam.
Right. It's fascinating how these personal journeys and experiences are woven into even the biggest historical events. But even after this revelation at Badr, Lubaba and Abbas and their children, they stayed in Mecca a bit longer. It wasn't until after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah.
The Treaty of Hudaybiyah,
hmm
the one that established a truce between the Muslims and the Meccans.
That's the one. It was after that treaty that they finally migrated to Medina to join the Prophet in the growing Muslim community.
Wow. That must have been a huge moment for them, finally being reunited with the Prophet and becoming part of the community they had longed to be a part of. And I'm guessing it was in Medina, surrounded by all these believers, that Lubaba really saw her son, Abdullah, blossomed into the scholar he became.
You got it. Imagine Abdullah as a young boy having the chance to spend his formative years learning from the Prophet himself.
That's an incredible opportunity.
Mhm.
No wonder he soaked up so much knowledge.
And Lubaba, she totally encouraged that connection. She knew how important it was for him to be close to the Prophet, to learn from him directly.
It's like she recognized his potential and made sure he had the chance to fulfill it. And honestly, it's thanks to people like Abdullah and the mothers who nurtured their thirst for knowledge that we have these precious insights into the Prophet's life today. But, it's important to remember, Lubaba wasn't just a supportive mom. She was a force in her own right. She was active in the community, always visiting the Prophet and his family, and she even participated in some pretty significant events, like the Farewell Hajj. The Farewell Hajj, wow. That was a pretty big moment in history, right?
Yeah.
The Prophet's last pilgrimage.
Oh, yeah, absolutely pivotal. A lot of the lessons he taught during that journey, people still hold on to those today.
And Lubaba was there for it, right?
Sure.
After all that time in Mecca, all the struggles. Must have been quite an experience for her.
Oh, for sure. It was a huge event. And Lubaba, she wasn't just there to observe. Her understanding of Islam, it really shines through in this story.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So the lecture mentions this incident on the day of Arafat. That's a really important day during Hajj. And a lot of the companions, they were unsure if they were supposed to be fasting that day.
Fasting, yeah. It's considered a very virtuous act to fast on the day of Arafat. But I can imagine with all the physical demands of Hajj, it's got to be tough.
Exactly. They were exhausted from the journey, and they saw the Prophet deep in prayer, didn't want to interrupt him with a question.
So they were kind of in a bind. They didn't know what to do.
Right. But Lubaba, she picks up on this, sees what's going on.
What did she do?
Well, she decides to bring the Prophet a glass of milk.
Smart. A subtle way to kind of get some clarification without disturbing him.
Exactly. It shows her understanding of Islamic etiquette, but also her closeness to the Prophet. If he'd refused the milk, it would have meant fasting was obligatory, but he took it and drank from it.
So that cleared it up for everyone. Fasting was not required that day.
Exactly. Lubaba, she just had this knack for navigating those tricky situations with grace. Kind of like how she handled being a foster mother to Hussein, the Prophet's grandson.
Oh, yeah, right. That was a whole other chapter in her life.
It was. And, the lecture even mentions a dream she had that kind of foreshadowed this relationship with Hussein. She dreamt that a piece of the Prophet's flesh was in her home.
Whoa, that's a pretty vivid dream.
It is. And when she told the Prophet about it, he predicted that she would nurse both her own newborn son and Fatima's soon-to-be-born child.
And that child turned out to be Hussein. It's like destiny brought them together.
It really is. And there are all these heartwarming stories about their bond. Like, there's one where Lubaba was carrying Hussein, and, well, he had a little accident on the Prophet.
Oh, no. Kids, right.
Exactly. Happens to the best of us. But what's beautiful is how the Prophet reacted. When Lubaba lightly spanked Hussein, he said, "You have hurt me by hurting my son."
Oh, that's so sweet. Shows how much he loved his grandson. Even a little discomfort to Hussein was felt by him.
And this incident, believe it or not, it led to an important legal ruling in Islam. The Prophet clarified that when a boy who's still breastfeeding urinates, you just sprinkle the area with water, different from the ruling for a baby girl.
So you see how Lubaba's everyday life, her experiences as a mother, they contributed to the development of Islamic law. It's pretty amazing.
It really is. And thankfully, a lot of her stories and teachings, they were preserved thanks to her son Abdullah's meticulous record-keeping and other companions like Anas ibn Malik. Lubaba even narrated around 30 hadiths herself.
Wow, she truly was a transmitter of knowledge, a witness to so many important moments.
She lived a long life too. Died during the Caliphate of Uthman, the third caliph after the Prophet. Buried in al-Baqi, that famous cemetery in Medina.
Resting among those who shaped the early days of Islam. It's a fitting end to her story.
It is.
Learning about Lubaba has been eye-opening. It makes you realize that history isn't just about the big names. There are so many people like her who might not be as famous, but they played such important roles.
It's like putting together a puzzle, right? Each story adds another piece.
Exactly. And what I find so inspiring about Lubaba is her strength, her faith, her dedication to her family and community. She truly embodies what it meant to be a Muslim in those early days.
Her story is a reminder that there are hidden figures everywhere, whose stories haven't been told, whose contributions have we overlooked. It's a challenge to keep digging, keep exploring, keep learning.
Well said. Lubaba's story is definitely one I'll be thinking about for a while. Thanks for taking us on this journey with her.
My pleasure. Always happy to share these stories.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with more fascinating stories from Islamic history. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.